General A yields. Chair now recognizes Mr. Smith.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate you calling this very important hearing. This is an issue that's on the minds of many of our constituents. They want to make sure that the money is being very well utilized with total transparency. And again, I want to thank our three Inspector Generals for your leadership. Aggressive oversight obviously mitigates criminality. It also encourages the proper use of scarce resources. So thank you so very much for that leadership. A couple of questions. One of them would be, Ms. Anna Garella, you had mentioned that there were no serious criminal findings. And I wonder if you could just explain to the committee how you define serious and maybe some examples of what other types of criminality or what you thought was didn't rise to the level of serious but is a problem. I would also, all of you, what were the lessons learned from Iraq? We had IGs there, obviously, and a lot of money went the wrong way and went wayward. And I'm sure you've taken into account all the years to date work that hopefully leads to a better bit of work. And then the IGs from other countries, including NATO, how do you collaborate with them to ensure that, particularly when funds and weapon systems and the like are harmonized with our NATO partners, that it's all being, that their portion, are they doing their due diligence like you are to ensure that it's all well spent?
Thank you for your question. What I mean by serious findings is after a process of thorough investigative work or audit work done to the standards that my IG counterpart George described in his statement are followed through with. So to date, we have not substantiated any allegations. We have 2 open investigations and 5 that are in the preliminary stages where we're doing more due diligence and taking additional investigative steps to see if they meet the level of investigative resources. So, but they have not been substantiated. And by serious, the example that I gave of the collusive bidding scheme, which was reported to us by one of USAID's major contractors that are working in Ukraine, is an example of a common fraud scheme that we see in USAID's programming around the world. And in that instance, the contractor identified it before they made the subaward to the collusive bidder. On your last question, which I think is really important about NATO or for USAID's perspective, other bilateral donor coordination, that is a huge percentage of the time and resources we spend doing as USAID OIG. Much of USAID's work is different than other IG offices, including ones that I've worked at. Our work is done overseas. It's not done in the United States. So we absolutely have to coordinate and communicate with other donor countries and specifically their oversight organizations. So we have long-standing relationships and memorandums of understanding in place with other bilateral donors, such as the EU Anti-Corruption Unit, OLAF, and also with UN organizations, because significant amounts of USAID's programming is done through UN organizations. We have similar MOUs and relationships and collaboration in place with the UN organizations. For example, WFP, I just returned with my staff from Rome, meeting with and re-signing an MOU with the WFP IG, as well as meeting with Ambassador McCain and talking about oversight and collaboration issues. So it's a key part of us doing our work effectively.
I was just going to add, with the part that you opened up to all of us, what I agree with everything Nicole said, and would just add as well that, one of the things I think that we've learned around the world, and the chairman referred to this at the very beginning, is the importance of getting in early and getting established early and doing the oversight. So Iraq was way before my time as the DoD IG. But having said that, one of the things we've really been stressing, and I think you heard it in all of our opening statements, is the importance of coordinating early, working together up front to get ahead of oversight, so that we're not playing catch up later. So that's one important lesson. And then the other one is coordinating amongst ourselves and with our partners. And all of our offices have robust relationships we have our own law enforcement, we have law enforcement all over the world that we have established relationships with, and that's really important as well. And then the final thing I'd add is we've learned a lot by doing oversight in conflict situations about what are the type of risks that are presented. Some of it on the front end, things like contracting type risks and things like that when there's a lot going on in a short period of time. And how do you get in front of that? So for instance, my office has literally done dozens of fraud briefings in the region where we've gone out and talked to folks who are engaged in this about what to look for. So I think we've learned a lot.
I'm out of time, but just maybe sometime during the course of your answers, in-country risk to your forward-deployed investigators, have any been hurt? And what is the risk factor that they, and again, that's very courageous work they're doing. Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Gentleman yields back. Chair recognizes Mr. Cicilline.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to today's witnesses for your testimony and for your written testimony as well, which I've studied very carefully. Russia's illegal and unwarranted brutal invasion of Ukraine marks the largest land war in Europe since World War II and the biggest threat to democracy since the Cold War. Vladimir Putin thought he could divide the West, but he was sorely wrong. And now today, more than a year since the invasion began, the West remains united in our commitment to Ukraine's democracy and territorial sovereignty. President Biden and his administration restored America's standing on the world stage and helped unite NATO and the West to provide Ukraine with the help they needed to protect their country and stand up to authoritarianism. Over the last year, the United States and our allies have provided military, economic, and humanitarian assistance to our Ukrainian allies in their fight for freedom. Military assistance has given brave Ukrainians on battlefields across their country the tools needed to fight back Russian forces. Economic or direct budget assistance has been deployed through the World Bank to help pay the salaries of healthcare workers, teachers, and pensioners, allowing the Ukrainian government to focus on providing basic services to its citizens and winning the war. And humanitarian assistance has been critical in delivering safe drinking water, emergency food, generators, and medical equipment to vulnerable Ukrainians across their country. These different sources of funding represent the comprehensive approach that the Biden administration is taking to ensure that Ukrainian families have access to basic services while their loved ones risk their lives in defense of their country. Throughout our nation's history, we've learned a lot from U.S. involvement in conflicts abroad about the importance of having robust oversight of foreign assistance, ensuring that dollars are being used for the prescribed purposes. The Biden administration and the Ukrainian government understand the need for trust and accountability just as much as we do. It's important to note that for Ukrainians, the very existence of their country and identity is at stake. So they have a vested interest in rooting out corruption and any person who would jeopardize further foreign assistance. That is why, since the beginning of this conflict, both the Biden administration and the Ukrainian government have emphasized the need to prioritize accountability by creating layers of oversight. For example, USAID currently provides direct budget support through the World Bank within the Public Expenditures for Administrative Capacity Endurance, or the PEACE program. That program only allows for funds to be sent to projects within a pre-approved expenditure category that have been verified as an actual expenditure. These funds can only be sent on reimbursement, meaning that none of this funding can be spent discretionarily. The PEACE program has additional auditing and reporting requirements built into it, which serves as additional accountability mechanisms. In addition, USAID has recruited the firm Deloitte, an independent third party, to oversee the use of funds by the Ukrainian government. The Government Accountability Office Center for Audit Excellence has created a new partnership with the Ukrainian government to strengthen the ability of Ukraine's own auditing institutions. And today, Inspectors General of the State Department, Department of Defense, and USAID have shared the work they are carrying out every day to oversee their respective departments and agencies to ensure both transparency and accountability. The Biden administration and the Ukrainians know just how important it is to build trust, to show the American taxpayers where their dollars are going. That's why they've taken extraordinary steps to build upon existing mechanisms and to create new ones to establish even more transparency and accountability. Our work to support Ukraine here in Congress has been largely bipartisan because we, especially those on this committee, understand what is at stake if Vladimir Putin is successful in this war. And it is my hope that we can continue to support the people of Ukraine in the same way as they fight for their freedom. And I really want to use my time to thank the witnesses for the work that they are doing and leading this effort to establish without question the prudent, effective, and proper use of American funding for this effort to protect democracy. And I'll just ask Ms. Angarella if you would just maybe briefly describe in the time that's left why this reimbursable model is so effective in ensuring proper oversight of funding in the war context.
Sure. Thank you for your question. I'll start by saying, as the IG, we didn't have a role in determining the mechanism or setting any policy for how it would be done. From a subject matter sort of expertise level, the reimbursement mechanism, as you so accurately described, is on eligible expenditures. And so what that allows our office to do is to review the reports and to assess from an independent standpoint whether the expenditures were eligible. So that mechanism that was chosen by the decision makers gives us the flexibility to look at specific expenditures as opposed to just dollars going into a general account.
Thank you so much, and thank you again for all of your work, the three of you. And I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman yields. Chair recognizes Mr. Perry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me start out by saying that no one on this committee, no one in America, left or right, agrees with the actions, the decisions of Vladimir Putin or Russia regarding Ukraine. Let me just say that outright. To Mr. Storch, I think it would surprise many Americans to know that the financial assistance that the United States has provided eclipses the so-called security assistance, the ammunition, the weapons, etc., to the tune of about $26.4 billion from what I gather here, at the very same moment where we're in extraordinary measures in the United States regarding our own fiscal posture, where the Civil Service Retirement and Disability Fund is suspended, where the Postal Service Retiree Health Benefit Fund is suspended, and we're literally funding the pensions and the operation of government in Ukraine. Can you give us assurance that none of that money is that's being sent to arguably one of the most, if not the most corrupt country on the planet is being misused, misspent, lost, malfeasance, gone to oligarchs or special individuals connected to, the government, etc.? What assurance can you give the American people?
Thank you very much for the question. First of all, it's my understanding that of the $113 billion that the Congress has appropriated to date for Ukrainian assistance, over $62 billion, I think it's 62.3, has gone to security assistance, and that's really the area in which my office performs oversight, although very much hand in glove with my colleagues from State AID and the rest of the 20-member strong oversight working group. And we work every day to ensure that we're doing robust oversight, both the sort of programmatic reviews and the investigations.
So we get no assurance, and I understand you're working with your partners, but you can give us no assurance. Is that generally the answer?
Well, so what I've testified to, Congressman, is that based on our completed work, we have not substantiated any instances of diversion of U.S. security assistance to Ukraine.
Right. And it took us years in Afghanistan to establish that as well. But I need to move on. Ms. Shaw, the Global Engagement Center's mission is to focus on foreign disinformation. Would you agree with that?
Yes, I believe that's accurate.
That's their mandate, right? So is a government agency authorized to violate the First Amendment rights of U.S. citizens?
That's a legal question.
No, really? You've read the Constitution. Is a government agency, or is the federal government, of which this would be an agency, authorized to violate the First Amendment rights of United States citizens?
I don't believe so.
I don't believe so either. Is a government agency allowed to subcontract or contract out the abrogation or the violation of the First Amendment rights of U.S. citizens? If they can't do it themselves, because it would be against the law, are they allowed to contract that out or subcontract that out? What do you think?
I'm sorry, this is not within the purview of our oversight work, and we don't have work that looks squarely at this issue.
So you're as the IG for state, you don't look at the Global Engagement Center. That wouldn't be under your purview.
We do look at the Global Engagement Center. We have published work from, I believe, 2020 looking specifically at that program.
All right, so you're familiar with the fact that they have themselves engaged Twitter to blacklist U.S. citizens under the guise of foreign disinformation, or have engaged partners that they have funded to do the same thing. Are you familiar with that? And would that be a problem if you knew that, if your agency knew that?
I am familiar with those allegations, yes.
But you have not looked into them?
No, we have not.
So if it's true, if it is true that they have either engaged directly or engaged indirectly through outside partners, some of which they have provided grant money to, what would be the appropriate response from the Inspector General regarding that kind of activity, which would actually literally be subverting and denying the civil rights of Americans?
So offices of Inspector General do investigate allegations of criminal conduct, violations of law, and so that is something that would be within our purview. I do believe that I'm aware that this is also the subject of ongoing litigation, and so that also is an element to this. But yes, we do look at potential.
And if they have violated it, and knowing that they're up for funding and reauthorization, would you recommend as the Inspector General that they not be reauthorized if they were involved in this criminal conduct against American citizens?
I'm sorry, I don't have a position on that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield.
Gentleman yields back. Chair now recognizes Mr. Barra.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Normally don't do this, but I would just like to correct my good friend and colleague from Pennsylvania. While there may be a history of corruption in Ukraine, Russia is a much more corrupt country, and we've seen the actions of Vladimir Putin and the moral corruption of Vladimir Putin. So let's correct the record. Russia has demonstrated their corruption here, and I applaud the chairman and ranking member for holding this hearing, because it is important for us to do oversight. It is important for us to defend democracies and the sovereignty of nations like Ukraine. And I'm proud of the work that we've done on the Foreign Affairs Committee in a bipartisan way, as well as in Congress, standing up for this illegal war and illegal invasion that Vladimir Putin is executing, and the moral corruption that we're seeing. Glad that the International Criminal Court has deemed him a war criminal because of what he's doing to children, kidnapping them, removing them from their parents. Reprehensible. Ms. Shah, let me ask a couple questions. And if this is not in your purview as the Inspector General, certainly let me know. You have oversight of the embassy in Kyiv. I'm curious how, obviously we evacuated the embassy in the early days of the invasion. We've stood that up again. How things are going, how operations are, and the safety of our men and women that are representing us in Kyiv.
Thank you for that question. This is something that is of vital importance to us in terms of our oversight. As I mentioned, management and operations is one of the 3 strategic areas that we're focusing on. We actually have a series of work ongoing right now that, as I said, will start with the shuttering of the embassy in February 2022 to its reopening to its current operating status. And while I don't want to get out ahead of those findings until we've completed that work, we did have the opportunity to meet with embassy officials in Kyiv. We were at the embassy. I am glad to report that at least at that time, everybody was well, but obviously they're operating under very challenging circumstances. Sort of stepping out more broadly beyond just safety, there are security issues that in a wartime setting have to be considered. We did just issue a classified management alert with some technical security issues that we identified at the embassy, and we're able to put forward some recommendations that we think will help address those and ensure the security of the operations at the embassy. But I look forward to publishing our completed body of work on this question, which I think will be very illuminating in terms of how it's operating.
Great. And again, if this, second question, if this is not part of the Inspector General, certainly let me know. In the early days of the invasion, we obviously saw refugee flows coming out of Ukraine, women and children particularly. My district, Sacramento County, has a large Ukrainian American population, obviously, that are very concerned about relatives and family that are coming out. In your perspective, doing oversight of the visa process, the humanitarian parole process, et cetera, can you give us an assessment of how that's working, if there's things that we should be thinking about in Congress? And again, not from a policy perspective, just from an oversight perspective.
So we do have ongoing work looking at the department's deployment of humanitarian aid, and the department has a large role in assisting refugees. So again, don't want to get out ahead of the findings in that work, but we are putting out an information brief. It'll be published next month that's looking specifically at how those funds are being deployed, to which of its 9 implementing partners, and what needs are being addressed by that. And I think that might help answer some of your questions.
Great, thank you. And just in my remaining time, Mr. Storch, I think you called it the end-use monitoring, EUM. Obviously, I'd have to imagine it's difficult in a wartime situation, on the front lines and so forth, to check the accuracy and making sure how those munitions are used. Again, if you can't answer this question in this setting, just let me know. Are we contracting with the Ukrainians to do some of the work, or are we deploying personnel to do some of that monitoring on the front lines?
So I appreciate the question, and yes, you're right. I mean, for instance, the point that the chairman made about using scanners, right? One of the things that the American military has done in a difficult situation is tried to figure out alternatives as to how to comply with EUM requirements and ensure the accountability of the material that's being provided. The details of that, as I think your question suggested, some of that's classified. That's why our October 2022 report was classified. So I can't get into that. But I will say, as we look at that, one of the things we're doing as an oversight entity is looking at the alternatives that are being employed and trying to make recommendations as to how to do that as effectively as possible in what is, as you say, a wartime situation.
Great. My time's expired. I yield back.